Welcome back to The Only Playbook, folks. I am your host, Sweetcar. I got Shovit alongside me today, and today we have a special guest on the podcast. If you know anything about the NFL landscape or you read a lot of articles, this guy is everywhere. He is none other than Arif Hasan with Wide Left Football on Substack. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on now. Hey, Arif, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, what's going on?
Not much, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you all?
Hey, doing well. I'm Sweetcart. That is Shovit. Really appreciate your time, man. Like I was telling the folks, again, this is Arif Hasan with Wide Left Football on Substack. You're formerly with Pro Football Network and The Athletic. So the credentials are all there. I did a little bit of a, deep dive into you. So a little bit creepy status, but,
Sure.
writing in the NFL, writing about the Vikings specifically. I guess my first question to you, Arif, is, are you a Vikings fan or did you get into writing with the Vikings and now you just write for the Vikings in the NFL?
I mean, I started out as a Vikings fan. I started covering the Vikings. I started blogging about the Vikings. I think that as I continued to cover the team, I think just over time, I lose my fandom. And so, it's just like part of the deal. And it's not like a Viking specific thing, although they give you a lot of reasons to jump ship.
Absolutely.
It's just like, I think when people start covering teams professionally, interacting with the players, breaking down everything, like in by necessity being as objective as possible, it becomes very difficult to continue being a fan, especially like when you're in the press box and there's a no cheering in the press box rule. It
Wow.
just becomes like part of the deal. And so I was Vikings fan. I wouldn't consider myself a Vikings fan anymore, although I do get frustrated with the team in ways that are like very similar to fandom. So who's to say, right?
No, I mean, I think that's a great point, and that segues right into it. I know your time is valuable, so I want to jump right into it. The topic of the conversation is exactly that, man. Kirk Cousins, 6 years with the Vikings, he's officially gone. I read your article, and then I listened to your Norse Code episode this morning. So a couple of things I kind of pinpointed. One from the article, if you didn't check it out, it's over at Wide Left Football on Substack. One quote that I picked off, Arif, I want you to kind of dissect this a little bit for me because I thought it really spoke volumes to be able to articulate what Kirk Cousins meant in a way that I couldn't articulate. And most people, I think, struggle articulating because he is boring, but, all the other stuff. So one thing you mentioned is Kirk Cousins is a victim of anchoring bias. How he played for the first several years in Minnesota has become how he is. Stats be damned. And none of that is really false because what detractors are telling you isn't that Kirk Cousins can't do this or that. They're telling you that they don't believe in him and he can't do anything to create that belief. And I think that really rung true to me because I couldn't articulate what my issue with Kirk Cousins was other than, the regurgitated narratives that you clearly debunked in the entire article, right? Fourth quarter comebacks, checkdowns, all that stuff, which he still displayed, yet the naysayers could not get on his side. And as somebody who is in fact that, I guess, talk to me a little bit about or convince me about why these 6 years with Kirk Cousins were in fact a success, or I should view this as like glass half full versus glass half empty and another 6 years of treachery as a Vikings fan.
Yeah, well, I think it's all about expectation, right? Kirk comes in to a team that had just, been in the NFC Championship game, that had the best defense in the NFL, and was poised for success, right? And so he comes in, he's to me, objectively, just an upgrade over Case Keenum, right? Which was the whole idea. And now you've got an offense that's got, these great receivers at the time. People consider them a top 3 receiving duo in the NFL. Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, right? They've got, an offensive line that's not wonderful or anything like that, but they've got a really good running game, and they've got this just astounding defense, right? Led by a coordinator that is like revolutionizing the way that the NFL does defense. He comes in and they don't do anything. Like and part of that, I think, isn't necessarily his fault. I think that they hired the wrong offensive coordinator with John DeFilippo. I think that was a big problem in 2018. But as time goes on, right, there's just like less and less we're getting out of this team, and a bunch of things happen, right, that are not necessarily his fault, right? A bunch of things happen, and there are some games where it's like, hey, Cousins should have played better. Didn't happen, right? 2019, 2020, these are really good defenses. Falls off in 2021 in a huge way. And that's why Mike Zimmer, was let go. But there is this understanding of like what Kirk Cousins was supposed to provide, right? It wasn't that he was brought in to be an elite quarterback. They sent with like 32 million, 35 million when they brought him in. That wasn't elite quarterback money at the time, right? The idea was if you upgrade the quarterback position, this team that was just on the verge of making it to the Super Bowl would get over the hump and win it, right? Now, this is, of course, before Patrick Mahomes showed up into the NFL. And so it's like, oh, we just need like a different category of dude now. But like at the time, it was just like, hey, they were like this close. Like all you got to do is beat Nick Foles / Carson Wentz or whatever is going on over there. Yeah, sure. That was the idea, right? And he didn't do that, and so it was like very disappointing. But that isn't to suggest that he played poorly or that he was unsuccessful in terms of what he provided to the Vikings. Now, obviously, by his own standards, by the Viking standards, by fan standards, he was unsuccessful, right? They didn't win a Super Bowl. They won one playoff game. But in terms of what he provided, it was actually some pretty high level play. Some years top 8, some years top 10. I would argue, before he got injured in 2023, this year, top 6-ish, kind of hard. There's a lot of really good quarterbacks. Yeah. Because it's like, I don't want to be like, well, he's not like Mahomes level, but like, right?
I think you're right. When you talk about Mahomes nowadays, you just have to have like Mahomes and everybody else, right? Like Mahomes shouldn't even have a category anymore. He's just his own guy.
And it's like some of these other like really excellent quarterbacks are just not having their years, right? Jalen Hurts is falling off. I know Lamar Jackson won the MVP, but like for most of the year, he wasn't actually doing super hot, right? Brock Purdy is producing, but no one really believes in him. Fine. I'm comfortable with that. Josh Allen is playing outstanding football, but the picks are just showing up. Again, not his fault, but he's earned the benefit of the doubt for most people most of the time. Cousins hasn't. So when you're comparing him to these guys that, we're in this era of like incredible quarterback play, this year was probably the year for really good quarterback play to get something done. It didn't because the MVP just showed up again, like the perennial MVP, I should say. But it was like he plays at a really high level. And we can't really argue that the team was successful, and he represents the team, right? And I think, and this didn't make it into the piece or in the podcast, but one thing that I think really stands out to me is that a lot of people thought that the Vikings didn't do much this last offseason, which is crazy to me, right? And the reason I think is because Kirk Cousins was the quarterback. They weren't blaming the Vikings for not letting go of, well, some were, but like for the most part, people weren't saying they should have gotten rid of Kirk Cousins. Rather, they were saying the team feels the same to me. They changed like 9 of their starters on defense and like a couple of the starters on offense, like left guard, right? Like they changed the team substantially. And everyone's like, why didn't they do anything? It's like they fired the defensive coordinator. What do you mean they didn't do anything? But
not exciting enough for the fans.
Right. Yeah. But it felt like this is kind of the same team. And there was this feeling that the team should be doing more and that you had to pull it along. And you never want to feel like that with your quarterback, right? And because of that, because the team needed to be kind of pulled into success, it just kind of falls apart and it is uninspiring. And so I think that's what people are driving at when they talk about, oh, he can't win a playoff game or he can't come back or he can't play in crunch time and he can't improvise. And it's like, well, for the most part, yeah, that's pretty true. But these last couple of years, I mean, he's done all of that and more. He turned into a really good improvisational quarterback, which is something I never thought I'd see from him. He turned into a late game maven, which is not something I thought I'd ever see from him. They were winning close games. They were winning primetime games. They won the one playoff game, right? Like, again, it's kind of a, but and maybe the conversation changes if they beat the Giants, right? If he throws it to Jefferson instead of Hawkinson or other stuff happens earlier in the game where that becomes unnecessary, right? But it's not like the defense played outstanding in that game either, right? No. But we're talking about Kirk, right? So
he becomes such a polarizing person. Like, is there a more polarizing figure in football since you've covered it, where you're arguing with a quarterback who's 10 to 12 best in the world? Like, I don't know that he demands this much conversation or this much arguing. And I think something you said on Norse Code this morning was so funny, but so true. Like, let's remember expectations, right? So let's talk about the exciting times that Kirk brought, right? The playoff win, the win in Buffalo, right? All those exciting times. That was exciting football as a Vikings fan. Well, what did you guys talk about on the Norse Code? The Chiefs were some of the most unexciting football players this year. And what did they do at the end of the season? They hung the banner. They won the Super Bowl playing unexciting football, right? So trade places with Chiefs fans all year. They've watched 2017, 18, 19. Mahomes is coming onto the scene and it's exciting. Tyreek Hill's there. This year, all year we're covering fantasy football and we're like, the Chiefs don't look the same. Mahomes is like 8th in fantasy football. They have nobody catching passes. Rashee Rice only came onto the scene at the end. Travis Kelce's falling off. So they were not exciting, not inspiring, going into the playoffs looking like this is the year that someone's finally going to take them down. And this boring, uninspiring ragtag group of players, forget Patrick Mahomes, won the Super Bowl. So, right. So expectations looms large there again, is that, are you looking for exciting football where, 4th and 18, you're converting, you get a fumble at the 1 yard line. Yeah. In the moment, that is so exciting, but you peel the curtain back and you're like, if we didn't have Josh Dobbs running crazy with Atlanta, would we be drafting inside the top 8? Right. Like, would we be primed for a quarterback? So it's like, I don't know, man. It rings true as a Vikings fan that every year you have to talk about, well, this is what we can be happy about, right? Well, let's talk about, what went well. And I think personally, I'm just sick of that. I mean, 30 years of just having to deal with this has led me to believe that, like, the expectation for what we are looking for has to change. And I think this is the first time in my entire fandom where I felt like the tides have shifted, because we don't have a Donovan McNabb. We don't have a Brett Favre. We don't have another guy that we're like, God, we got to bring this guy in while he's, his legs are falling off. So we don't have that. We brought in Sam Darnold, which, again, not a great quarterback, but he's so much younger that, the expectations aren't that. So I guess, Arif, looking back at the Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins' era, I want to kind of put a pin on Kirk Cousins. Statistically, he's probably up there, right? Top 3 in maybe every statistical category in Vikings history. Personally, where do you rank him in terms of Vikings quarterbacks of all time?
Geez, I mean, that's tough, right? Because I think, like, if you're just doing film analysis, or if you're just doing statistical analysis, and you adjust for error and you do all the smart statistical things you need to do, yeah, easily top 3, right? There's no question, right? But, like, if I'm gonna watch a guy, I don't know. And again, he played exciting football, but it didn't feel like he did, right?
Yep.
And so it's like, I love Teddy, right? No chance Teddy's a top 3 quarterback in Vikings history. Not close, right? But it's like, that one season of Brett Favre was, like, special. Maybe I'll watch that, right?
Yeah.
Or I'll watch a ton of Fran. I'll watch Dante Culpepper.
Prime Dante, yeah. You tell me that the year he was second in MVP wasn't more electric than all 6 years of Kirk Cousins' career. Like, I'd fight you to the death.
Exactly. Right, exactly. And it's just like, the vibes of the teams were, like, out of control. Like, even the Christian Ponder 2012 team, right? Because Ponder was awful, right?
Awful.
But the team, Percy Harvin in the first half of that season was, like, making a legitimate argument for a wide receiver winning the MVP, right? Yeah. Like, I remember reading pieces that are like, hey, he's like 5th in our MVP race. That's, like, never happened, right? And then the second half, like, Adrian Peterson has the greatest 8-game stretch a running back has ever had, right? Mm-hmm. That ruled. And, like, Ponder sucked, but it was like, yeah, we'll work around that, right? And it was, like, fine, because we all at that point were like, yeah, Ponder's going to throw like 3 yards downfield and some stuff is going to happen. Don't worry about it, right? But with Cousins, it's like, you got to get the ball there. You got to get the ball there. What are you doing, right? And every mistake he made was the thing that we focused on, and every success Ponder made, it was like, oh, it's a bonus. That's nice, right? So
yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Like, yeah, obviously I would take Cousins over Ponder, but it's just like, when I'm going through these Vikings quarterbacks, it's like, yeah, I would probably watch Cousins over Tavares Jackson, but, like, what are we doing here, right? Like, why are we having this conversation?
We're going to get slandered by Vikings fans.
Yeah, right. Rip T-Jack, by the way. I don't want to, like, but, it's like Brad Johnson. I might prefer watching that, right? It's so, if I'm going over, like, how enjoyable it was to experience the, blank quarterback experience, it's like, oh, like, Brett's up there, Dante's up there, Fran obviously is up there, Teddy is up there. And that was more of a, like, we're kind of filled with hope about this guy than it was like, we got to win, but that feeling is fine.
The franchise so longs to have a guy that they can get behind that they drafted, right? Like, we wanted to get behind Ponder. I bought a Ponder shirt, and I don't think I'll ever wear that again, but, it is what it is. I bought a Teddy Bridgewater jersey. I'll still wear that. I mean, I made a bold prediction last year that Teddy would go off and be a veteran and be that backup that ends up replacing somebody to win a Super Bowl. But unfortunately, he's retiring, so that's not going to happen. But I'm with you in the sense that I think this franchise, for my 30 years of fandom, has never once had a quarterback that they drafted and we've gotten to see play 5 years consecutively without being hurt, like, with growth, with progression, the same coordinators, the same coaches. There's always change. And I think, again, that is the change that the Vikings fans, at least in my opinion, are longing for. So shifting gears to the future, right? Kirk Cousins, it was fun while it lasted. It is done. Looking at the quarterback class this year, all of the offseason moves that because we didn't bring back Kirk, we were able to shore up the defense. Obviously, we lost Hunter, but again, bringing in youthful players that fit into the window that, Jefferson, Darisaw, and all them fall into, I think that's key. So the quarterback class this year, Arif, I don't know how much studying you've done. Obviously, there's rumors about who the Vikings like, who's going to fall to the Vikings. Two-part question. One, who is your favorite quarterback in this draft? And two, who do you realistically think the Vikings are going to get?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite quarterback is Caleb Williams. I'm not gonna, try to be contrarian. He's just good. Like, I think people get like really distracted by his like off structure scrambling stuff, and he's extremely good at that, and that's exciting. So it's kind of the same thing with Mahomes, but it's like if you only look at the plays that occur in like the first 2.5 seconds, right? And you look at the proportion of his plays that come in those first 2.5 seconds, he's a very good in structure quarterback operating inside an offense that doesn't like give him a lot of safety, right? I mean, it's not like check downs in the offense.
No.
Like everyone's streaking down. Like Marshawn Lloyd, the running back, is like streaking downfield, right? Like, what do you, okay.
Yeah.
So I like him a lot. I think that there's a lot there. I like Drake May a fair amount. I think I'm kind of confused about like, hey, there's a couple of people who have Drake May number one. I can't be there. I think that there's like a separation there, but I do like Drake May a fair amount. And Jaden Daniels, I love. I mean, he's older. He's got these size concerns that'll lead to injury concerns, and you've got some questions about his timing and his footwork. But I think that for the most part, he can make things work, and that's and he's like insanely exciting, right? Which is like a nice bonus.
Not to mention he's worn the same colors, so we know it looks good.
Right, yeah, exactly. He's got the aesthetic figured out. So, like a key part of like when Teddy put on, the gloves. Oh yeah, it was on.
Oh, I was all
like,
in.
We know, right?
Who cares that he threw 15 touchdown passes? I was in.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah, Troy Dye not wearing gloves was insanely bad. Like the aesthetics matter, right? There's a reason that guy didn't make it onto the field. But yeah, like those are my guys, and it's a super like boring list, but it's like I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Those are the guys I like, right? So
do you think though, I agree with you. Caleb to me is by far 1A. Again, I think at this point you're just really nitpicking to find concerns with him. There really aren't. Every quarterback in college is going to have concerns. It's all about the fit and the coaching and everything, right? But if you put everything together and Caleb fully fills out what his prospect potential is, he's by far the best quarterback in the draft. But obviously, I don't see the Vikings trading up to 1. Chicago's would be crazy to do that. Even 2 seems kind of far-fetched to me, but I guess the Drake May potential would be if Jaden Daniels went 2. Realistically, all of the steam around the Vikings right now is JJ McCarthy. Do you think there's a lot of smoke there? Or do you really think the Vikings are living in a world where they know the reality of not being able to trade into the top 3 and settling for JJ? Because the last thing I want to do is see my franchise settle for another quarterback because you're forced to take a quarterback and they turn out to be another Christian Ponder.
Yeah, when I was kind of digging around at the combine, kind of asking like, hey, what do they think about this quarterback? Mind you, I wasn't talking to anybody with the Vikings. This is like essentially third-hand information, right? I heard that they were really high on JJ McCarthy, and I tried to get like some clarity on like what that meant. Are they high on him as a first-round pick? Are they high on him as the top of the second tier of quarterbacks? Are they high on him as a top 10 pick? Because that's like way different than a first-round pick, right? Like, what does it mean to be high on a quarterback who, is like, oh, they think he could be a starter? Was like, oh, that doesn't, a lot of people think he can be a starter. Like, what does that mean in terms of like what the Viking strategy is? And I couldn't get more clarity on that, but I do know they like him. So he's not like off the board. He's not below, the consensus or anything like that for the Vikings. So there's that. I heard that they love Drake May, which like a huge shock, right? Like, oh, he's
right. Oh, a prospect. Yeah.
Right. And what's interesting to me is I heard that, they were not crazy about Jaden Daniels, and then other people heard that they loved him. So I don't know what the deal was with that. But that's like something to kind of keep in mind is like, as like these reports come in about like, hey, this team loves this team. Sometimes it's just, you hear conflicting information. Again, I didn't hear it from the team themselves or anybody affiliated with the team. So I'm always going to, think that, hey, if somebody else has got like a report that they're standing behind, that probably means a little bit more. But, a lot of things can just kind of happen as like people continue to communicate down the chain. So
yeah,
those are like my understandings of like what the Vikings are up to.
quick question, just going off script. This is really fascinating that like being on the combine, hearing these stories, like how do these conversations kind of happen? Like, do you just like start having conversations with the teams and say, hey, like, what do you think about this guy? And they just kind of, you know, tell you like, hey, we like this, or how does that kind of get brought into discussion?
It happens in a lot of different ways. I'm not a huge sourced reporting guy. I like to do commentary and analysis and stuff like that. And so I don't spend a lot of time, having those kinds of conversations, but it really depends, right? So for example, like if you go, and there's a couple of bars in Indianapolis. So if you like go to Prime 47, which is kind of one of the premier, all the NFL people are hanging out at this bar every day at the combine. Jerry Jones has like the top floor, like rented out, like for a private party.
What did you say that name was? I'm taking notes.
Jerry,
Right?
I mean, it's Jerry Jones, right? But yeah, he'll just tell you stuff too, so you don't gotta,
There's nothing to pry there. Jerry's an open book.
Yeah. But there's like a lot of NFL personnel there, whether the coaches, general managers, high-ranking scouts, or people in the front office or whatever, right? And so you strike up a conversation with them, and just use your social skills, right? Like there's a couple of elements to that too, right? So Adam Schefter, for example, is not someone who like charms his way into getting all of the information he gets, which obviously he's not like antisocial. I'm not saying that he's like impossible to, but rather he trades information, right? And so, teams might benefit from, Adam Schefter's like, hey, there's this suspension coming down the pike. I heard this from the NFL league office. You should prepare for that, right? And teams like, oh my God, okay, thank you. And they get their plans in motion, and then later they pay back that favor. And they're like, hey, we're going to tell you before we tell anybody else, we're signing Danielle Hunter to a $49 million contract, right? Or something along those lines, right? Which I don't think Schefter was even the one that broke that story, but that's like an example, right? Yeah. And then there's other people that are just like really personable, right? That, and they take a genuine interest in people's lives. Like, hey, how's your kid doing? I heard your mom was sick. How's she doing? I sent her a gift basket, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or you just get people drunk. Like, it's like, I think people don't realize like scouts have not been able to have an opinion for like 10 months out of the year. And as soon as someone is like interested in like the thing they've been obsessed about for 10 months, and as soon as like some of the barriers are lifted, maybe through a social lubricant, they'll just tell you shit, right?
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, I have been wanting to dig on this guy for 10 months. You guys in the media have no idea. This guy sucks. And everybody with the Panthers hates this guy. And it's like, oh, yeah, cool. Tell me more.
All right. Yeah.
Or, and there's like different like ways to do it. But like, you could have long-standing relationships with people. I have relationships with people who, before they were ever involved in football on, the coaching or executive side, I was just friends with them. Right. And as our careers progressed, they went into the coaching or executive side of things, and we'll catch up. And, because we're good friends, we've done things for each other in the past, we'll continue to have conversations. And I can just be like, hey, I heard, just a little birdie told me, that that the 49ers are like really excited about this running back class or whatever, right? Which would be kind of funny because they're good on running back. This running back class is not. Yeah. I mean, I like the fourth rounders a lot. I think that they're good, but there's no top end running, right? But
I think that's what you want in a running back class, right? You don't want to be forced to be like, there's a guy that's so good, I have to take him top 5 because he's that good, right? And I think opportunity cost is so big, especially with the running backs. And you saw how crazy the running back market went the minute free agency started, because they probably felt like how you and I feel. The draft isn't great with running backs this year. So it was wild to see the signings. Obviously, the Vikings get Aaron Jones, which is, again, add him to the list of former Packers that wear the purple and gold. I love to see it. I want to be cognizant of your time. I don't want to spend too much time with it. I want to leave you with 2 things. I want Shobit to get a final question in as well, but I want to talk to you about last 6 years versus the next 6 years. Do you think Vikings fans will be happier or sadder about how the next 6 years go for the purple and yellow?
Oh my God, that's such an interesting question. I think they're going to be way more engaged. Just because like there's a lot more like what does the future hold? Let's talk about that kind of stuff. So, happier or sadder? I think the Vikings will probably not be an 8-win team or a 9-win team next year, right? And so they'll lose probably more games than they did this last year, although this last year wasn't great with the 7, but I think Vikings fans will be happier despite that, because I think the expectation with a rookie quarterback or Sam Darnold, if they don't get a rookie quarterback, it's Sam, right? Which would be a catastrophic failure, right? But if they do get a rookie, right? If they don't get a rookie, they'll just be mad the whole time until Sam Darnold strings together like 5 games. And you're like, okay, I'm fine, I get it, right?
We'll never hear the end of it from Kirk stands, by the way, if Sam Darnold's really bad for the first 5 games. But continue.
Yeah, right. Yeah. They can have their fun. I mean, Atlanta now has to deal with them. It's fine. But I think they'll be happier. Like if the Vikings win 5 games, but the rookie quarterback shows promise, people will be like, I'm content. I'm happy. I'm excited about the direction of this franchise. We needed to do this. So I think next year they'll be happier. Now, 6 years, obviously that depends on the quarterback. But I think these last 6 years will be more successful, but less exciting than the next 6 years. And I think that there's probably a good chance that they won't be as happy at the end of the next 6 years as they were at the end of these last 6 years. And that's the risk, right? Is that in order to be great, you have to risk failure. And the nature of drafting quarterbacks is that more of them fail than succeed. But you just have to absorb that cost.
Yeah. And outside looking in, I'm not a Vikings fan, but I do follow it because Sweetcar is a Vikings fan. So I get a lot from him about the Vikings.
To both of you, actually.
So with that, I'm looking at the Vikings organization. I see Kwesi and I see O'Connell, and I'm like, I would be a little bit worried for their job security, right? If they don't get that quarterback of the future, if Sam Darnold isn't able to keep them competitive, do you see firings happening for either one of those guys, or do you think that they're understanding that this is going to be a long play, it's a rebuilding time, and it takes time to get to being elite?
Yeah, I think that there's a good understanding from ownership, and ownership has been famously patient. They've let coaches go through multiple rookie quarterbacks. They've let GM. I mean, Rick Spielman was there for 12 years, right?
Long time.
Rick Spielman initially showed up in 2005 as a high-ranking personnel executive that was one of the 3 people involved in decisions. And then in 2012, it was 2012? Around 2010, 2012, somewhere in there, became sole GM. So he actually had a large decision-making capacity for 5-6 years before that, and then became so he was there for a long time. This is a very patient organization, just generally speaking, right? The only person I feel like they've never been patient with was Leslie Frazier, and it's all right, it's fine.
Makes sense.
Good human being, but
Yeah, exactly. It's okay, yeah, I mean, and you got Mike Zimmer out of that. That's great. Yeah. They were patient with Zimmer, right? And I think that they'll be patient here. And I think most owners in this situation, unless it's Mark Davis, right, would be patient in this upcoming situation, because they will not just allow them to let that quarterback, sink or swim that first year, knowing, that Josh Allen scenario where this guy becomes insane in his 3rd year after 2 years of struggling, is on the table, right? They'll know that. And I think that they'll kind of trust that until the end of year 3 of a new quarterback situation, they're not going to make any significant moves on coach or front office unless something unrelated to that comes up, right? If there's some sort of scandal or whatever, right? So I think that there's not really a hot seat scenario this next year. I think that if there's no improvement from next year to the year following, there are some questions and concerns, but it would be low probability. And I think year 3 would be make or break if they don't succeed in those first 2 years. And even then, they might be hey, you get one more, because they really model themselves off of, or they like to think of themselves as a very stable ownership situation akin to the Rooneys. They very much admire the way the Rooneys have run the Steelers. And you take a look at the number of head coaches the Steelers have had. Obviously, it's 6?
It must be nice.
5? Yeah, it's not a ton, including former Vikings coach Mike Tomlin, right? Yep. So they liked that model, and obviously Mike Tomlin benefited from the fact they went 15-1 his first year, and so that gave him kind of a runway. But the stability has become a brand for that organization in a huge way, and the Wilfs like that brand.
Yeah, no,
Makes sense.
I think you're right. I think again, compared to other franchises where you're seeing coaches just turn in and out, we do give a little bit more longer of a leash. And this is again uncharted territory for us, where we're going into a situation where we're drafting a quarterback. You have to give that guy time, which means you have to give the coaches and the people that are backing the drafting of that guy time to develop as well. Arif Hasan, thank you so much for your time, man. I know we went a little bit over. Wide Left Football, great article. Anything else you want to plug here to anybody that's listening?
Not really. I mean, I've got a couple of other podcasts, and I've got a new podcast project coming up, but it's so early. And the first meeting that we had about it was actually an hour before we recorded here, so it's so early. So pay attention, watch for that. But I'm on the Minnesota Football Party. I'm on the Norse Code podcast, which you mentioned, and my Substack is Wide Left Football, which actually the website for that is just wideleft.football. So you can just head over there. But yeah, I've got a couple of pieces up there that I think are interesting. Some of them are evergreen. I think my pinned piece is about gun violence at the Super Bowl parade. There's a wide range of things that I cover at that Substack. So, hopefully, somebody will find something that they like, whether it's a film analysis or a question about how quarterbacks develop, or kind of the most recent take on whatever the Vikings are doing. The idea is to have something for everybody there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Arif. I want to leave you with one last thing. Over under one playoff win for the Atlanta Falcons in the next 3 years.
3? Geez. 1. I don't trust the NFC South.
You're pushing it. You're pushing it at 1. So exactly one playoff win in the next 3 years.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Arif. Pleasure talking to you, man.
Thanks, Arif. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.